it's time to start.
Can you give me just 1 minute to go live on Facebook?
Okay, no problem. Another 1 minute, Professor Fernando.
We can start now.
Okay. So, good morning, everybody. It's my honor to introduce Professor Fernando Pérez to you. Professor Fernando is a professor with the School of Telecommunication Engineering at the University of Vigo. Also, he's a research professor in information science and technology at the University of New Mexico. He has co-authored over 75 papers in leading international journals and 175 peer-reviewed conference papers. He has co-authored 15 international patents related to watermarking for video surveillance, integrity, protections of printed documents, fingerprinting of audio signals, and digital terrestrial broadcasting systems. Professor Fernando is a fellow of the IEEE for contribution to multimedia security. He's also former program manager of the Spanish National R&D Plan on Electronic and Communication Technology. He's a former executive director of the Galician Research and Development Center. Professor Fernando is going to talk today about media forensic, digging up the invisible. So welcome, Professor Fernando, and the speech with you now. So you can start, and we are interested to hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try to share the screen, and you let me know if I'm succeeding.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, great. So, okay. So thanks for the very nice introduction. It's really an honor to be here talking in front of you. And I hope you will enjoy this presentation, which is about media forensics. Media forensics is one of the topics in which I work. I've been working for the past more than 10 years now. And I will show you some of the things that we are doing in our group, and also what's the state of the art in this interesting topic. And well, let me start by showing you a number of pictures that have been photoshopped. These days we're very used to photoshopping or seeing photoshopped images, up to the point that sometimes it's very, very hard to say whether an image has been photoshopped or not. And I have a little quiz for you, and maybe you can ask yourselves about these images. Some of them have been photoshopped, some of them are natural images, or so close to natural images. And the quiz for you is to, well, you cannot tell that now, but we don't have the tools for doing this, but you can ask yourselves, and I'll show you the answers in half a minute. So think about that. Of course, these images have been purposely chosen, especially the natural ones. But okay, do you want to see the answers? Well, here are the answers. And I'm sure that with some of them you probably missed, especially in some of them that are photoshopped. but you wouldn't think so. And this is one of the problems we're facing these days. Even up to the point that sometimes people have to swear that images which look impressive have not been photoshopped, which is something a bit paradoxical, but it's happening. And this tells us about how far these systems for photo editing have gone. This is not a new thing. Of course, Photoshop is relatively recent, but it's not a new thing. In the 19th century already, with the advent of the photography, people were already using the brush and the aerograph to manipulate, in a way, images. And one of the earliest is this one of Abraham Lincoln from 1860. And it turns out that this picture the face was spliced onto a different image coming from another person on the right. Then there is this one from Ulysses Grant, the hero of the Civil War in the US. And it turns out that this image is a mix of 3 different images, this one. And as you can see, Ulysses Grant was not actually on the horse. So you see that at that time they were already good enough as to manipulate images in this way. Then in some countries it became relatively popular, especially in the Soviet Union. You see there in the left a picture, a very well-known picture of Lenin, Trotsky, Kamenev, and Khalatov. These were some of the first revolutionaries in the Soviet Union. But then as some of them lost favor, for instance, Trotsky, that you see on the right of Lenin, then they disappeared from the official images. And you see there. But you see also that Khalatov and Kamenev disappeared from the official pictures. Here's another example of Stalin and Yezhov. And Yezhov actually was the responsible for the purges that eliminated some people that were against the regime. He also fell victim of that. And then he also disappeared from the images. And this one is one of my favorite. These were cosmonauts, the first Soviet cosmonauts. And as you can see in this picture, some of them will appear and disappear from different versions of the picture. The original picture is the one here. Then in this picture, you see that there is one person missing. Then in this one, the person appears, but then the one on the right, bottom right disappears, and so on. So this was actually quite popular in the Soviet Union and so also some other countries. And the most interesting thing to me is that they were really good at doing this doctoring of images already at that time. So they didn't have Photoshop, but they had the skills to manipulate images very well. These days, there is a new risk, a new threat, which is made by this very famous deepfakes. Deepfakes are all over, and they're becoming a concern that is growing. Here I have a little video explaining how some of these deepfakes have been generated. And well, this is Obama. He's speaking, but he's not really speaking. And here you see that Obama's face can be, or movements, face movements can be transferred to many other faces of political leaders, and even the Gioconda on the right. And these programs have been becoming much more efficient. They are better now. And we're reaching the point where it's very, very difficult, as you will see later on in this presentation. It's becoming more and more difficult to tell apart the doctored images with deepfakes with the originals. And this is, of course, a growing concern. So there is even deepfakes as a service. So you can actually go online, and if you upload videos, you have to upload a source and a target video, and then you can get the faces swapped from one video to the other. It is actually not very expensive. It depends on how many iterations of the deepfake algorithm you want to perform, but it's not really so expensive. And you can create your own deepfake video with quite high quality, with really less or very little effort and cost. There is, and the persons that have this web, which is deepfakesweb.com, are aware of this problem of creating false identities with the deepfakes. So they put visible watermarks on the images that they generate. But it's clear that, I mean, in this case, it's possible to tell because they have the watermarks and they are visible. But it's clear that this is a problem because the technology is there. So it's not that hard to reproduce this technology. How does it work? Well, basically, there are several methods to create deepfakes, but basically all of them use the idea of auto-encoding. Then this idea can be pursued further with other techniques like adversarial networks, well, generative adversarial networks. You see in the left the original face, and this original face is somewhat compressed using a deep neural network into something called a latent face. And a latent face is just a set of characteristics that somehow are a fingerprint of the original face. And you train, so on the right you see the training. You train with reconstructed faces, and you compare these reconstructed faces with the training data. And then when that is the network is trained, then you can use that for generating deepfakes, as you can see on the right, on the bottom. So basically you extract the latent faces for each of the two faces that you have. For instance, in that case, you uploaded 2 videos, and then you extract the latent faces, and you just have to swap the generation. And then the faces are mapped into the movements of the other person. This can also be done using the so-called landmarks in the face, which are basically key points that represent the face. And then you extract the landmarks, and then you can remap those landmarks so that you can create versions of a face. You see the ones there on the top of the Gioconda or the Salvador Dali on the second row. They all come from the leftmost images, but then you can map them into other faces, on other expressions with very good success. So why is this a problem? Why is all this a problem? Well, it is a problem because as we all, there is the risk, a real risk of creating fake news using fake photos. And you have some examples there from the US, but there are many more all over the world. And the danger is that by creating these fake photos, you can basically swing public's opinion by creating fake news. There is also the risk of reputational damage. For instance, this image that you see on the right corresponds to the person on the left. He's a journalist from the New York Post, but he was in Fox News. He was shown like in the right, well, distorting the image because they were talking badly about this person, and well, that reinforced the bad image of this person. So this is a reputational damage. There are many examples of this. Also about this serious case, this person who was wrongly accused of being one of the Paris attackers in one of these bombings. And well, this was the picture that appeared in some media. And as you see, this, well, of course, is a bad picture. Maybe you could tell from the picture that it's already Photoshopped, but most people wouldn't notice. And this is the original. So, and of course, this caused a lot of damage in the reputation of this person, huge damage. he started getting threats by email, phone calls, and so on. And he just had taken a picture with his iPad. So this is a very dangerous thing. And there is also the risk of identity theft. And this is one of the things in which I'm working, because you can use deepfakes and other techniques to create false identities or impersonate other identities. And there is this case in which a voice deepfake was used to scam a CEO of a company to transfer money, basically impersonating that CEO. And the deepfake was so realistic that it really succeeded in making the employee who was responsible for doing the transfers in believing that he was actually listening to that person. And well, these days, with online registering processes, probably if you have opened an online account, you had to submit some documents, some identity documents. And if you did that, well, you should know that these identity documents can be very easily manipulated these days using Photoshop or other techniques. You can also go online and you can buy templates for Photoshop, so that it's much easier to create a false identity. You just have to upload the data and your own personal picture, and then it creates a national identity document for a number of countries. And as you see, it's not very expensive, right? Okay, so what are the solutions? Let's talk about the solutions here, because this is the part in which I'm, of course, from a technical perspective, more interested. And I would say there are several approaches to the problem. The first one, I call it semantic forensic analysis. As you will see, this is very, very attractive from a point of view of, let's say, forensics, but it has the problem of systematizing this kind of solutions. So it's very, very difficult to make these solutions into products because they happen to be rather ad hoc. And basically here you look for inconsistencies in the semantics of the scene. So here you see one of them is the lighting. So as you know, lighting has to, if you are lighting a sphere, then the reflection should show some pattern in which most of the light appears to be in the normal to the light source. So for instance, you can use this to detect whether an image has been manipulated or not. You see, for instance, the example on this picture, which was manipulated. You see that the ducks on the bottom don't show the light as the helmets of the policemen on the right of the image. So the reflection of, let's say, the point of most reflection doesn't appear to be consistent in both cases. This is easy to do with spheres. Another inconsistency that you can use is shadows, because shadows should follow a pattern. If you have a 3D model for the objects in a scene, then it's not so difficult to reconstruct the shadows. And on the right, you see one example of an inconsistency. So you see the roof and the shadows created by the chimney and so on. They are not consistent with the shadow that is projected by the kid who's playing basketball on the left. So you can use that. But again, this is very, very difficult to systematize because you have to, from the picture, you have to construct a 3D model. And this is in many cases very, very difficult to do with good accuracy. There is this example, a very good example. So this is, well, 9/11, apparently, allegedly, this is really a doctored image, but this guy, well, was supposed to be there that day. But if you look at the picture with some care, then you will see that while the light on the airplane is coming from above, you see that in the reflection on the peacock, then you see the light coming from the right, in the case of the person. So you can easily tell that, well, they were not at the same time, even in the same place. It turns out that the plane was copied there. There is also this image from Kim Jong-il from Northern Korea, and you see that the shadows on the bottom don't really match, because the shadows on the guys on the left and the right of Kim Jong-il are more slanted than the one that he's getting, right? Besides, if you see, there is a line there, like a horizontal line. Let me try to show it here. So this line here and here doesn't continue where Kim Jong-il is. So that's another little element that you could use. Then there is the inconsistencies of specular reflection, and we know the laws of specular reflection, and they can be used to detect some doctoring of images. Here you see one example, and it turns out that this image won a National Geographic Prize, a very, very prestigious award. But if you look at the clouds, you see that the clouds don't seem to be right, because they don't reflect. If the bottom part corresponds to water, then they don't reflect what's happening on the sky. Actually, you can see that there is like a continuum, right, of the clouds, which of course doesn't correspond to what you would expect. This one turns out to be from a salt lake in Chile. This one does actually have this property. So you see the cloud, and you see the mirror image of the cloud, and so on. So that's something that you can use also to detect inconsistencies. But clearly, there are not so many images in which you can use these properties, because there are not so many reflections after all. Another one that you can use is the so-called catch light inconsistencies. And basically similar to what we have been discussing. It turns out that the cornea acts as a sort of a mirror, and it's a sphere. So when you project light onto spheres, you happen to expect that the point at the normal gets most of the intensity and the reflection, right? So, and this is the same in the relative position of the spheres. So if the light source is far enough, then you will expect to get always the light, the point with most light reflected in the same relative position of the spheres. So this can be translated into the eyes. And this is something that you can do to spot fake images, especially indoors. And well, here's one. Of course, it's obvious that this image has been tampered with. But if you look at the eyes, you see that the reflection patterns, the catch light, is different in one picture and the other. And here's this highlighted. You can see that in this case they don't correspond to each other. So the two eyes happen to have the same pattern always. Well, normally for most persons, but they don't have the same pattern with respect to each other. So you can tell that actually the original image is this one, and if you analyze the original image with this same technique, then you will see that they do correspond to each other. Another one is perspective. So you can use perspective. Perspective was discovered by Italian painters in the 14th century, and since then, well, it revolutionized pictures. But in some cases, when people make doctored images, they don't pay attention to the perspective, like in this image down here. And if you look at the feet, well, there's one person here that probably you can already notice that this person wasn't there. And it's, well, I'll tell you which one is the one on the right, who was supposed to attend this meeting, but he was not there at the right time. So it was photoshopped. But if you look at the feet, then, well, you see something strange in the feet of this person, right? So you see that the other ones are like, okay, but this one is like levitating. And this is because they didn't get the right perspective of the feet. So this is one way you can tell. Again, very difficult to systematize. Another one is cropping traces. You can look at the traces of cropping. If normally people with cropping do really a bad job, you can tell, for instance, in this case, from the feet of this person, you can tell the cropping here in this person, you know, they didn't respect the roundness of the head. So also here, there are some traces of cropping, and this is something that we humans are very good at spotting. So sometimes you say, well, this image looks strange. Well, one way of detecting that for a human are these cropping traces. This can be, well, better systematized now that we can segment images and so on, but still is not so easy. It turns out that these persons were actually posted there. It turns out that some of them were already in the same image, but at a different place. So they were there, but they were not there at this particular picture. And then, well, you can also spot some other semantic inconsistencies, like that weird hand that appears on the bottom right. Those are other semantic inconsistencies, and you can find, well, these are really bad jobs with Photoshop. And of course, they are easy to spot, but because they are very, very bad jobs. Okay, so another approach. So again, these approaches are nice, but they have the problem of being very difficult to transform into successful software. So maybe for some cases, but it's very, very difficult to use them systematically. Another one that can be used is the analysis of metadata. So metadata is additional data that appear typically in this format called EXIF. And this metadata is, let's say, accompanying data to the picture. So some of these metadata are added by the camera. Sometimes the photographer can add some metadata. Also, if you are using some photo editing software, then you are also adding this metadata. So sometimes from the metadata, you can tell something. For instance, the typical fields that appear are the date and time, the parameters of the camera, like the orientation, the aperture, and so on. There is a thumbnail typically with the metadata, and sometimes it appears the processing software. So here's an example. This is an old image, and well, so the whole process is an old one. This was edited with something called Quick EXIF editor. So on the bottom, you see a picture of my two kids a long time ago. They're not kids anymore. But you see, I removed the logos in the shirts, like here. And by doing that, I did that with a photo editing software called GIMP. And well, it appears in the metadata. So one, in theory, could go and look at whether there are traces of photo editing software in the metadata. The problem is that this metadata is not very reliable, because with these editors of EXIF, you can easily change that. Also, in most of the, let's say, social, these metadata are removed for privacy reasons. So for instance, Facebook or WhatsApp or Twitter, when you upload a picture, then they remove the metadata. So you cannot expect too much about the metadata. There's one case about the thumbnails in which some editing or some cameras contain the thumbnail. So this thumbnail is just a very small image that has the purpose of enabling faster organization and viewing, and you see that in this example. So it's a very small version of the original one. And in some cases, it can be used to uncover some editing, because when people, well, with some software of editing, maybe they alter the image, but they don't alter the thumbnail. So from the thumbnail, you can tell whether the image was tampered with or not. But again, this happens very rarely. It's basically a bug of some of the editing softwares, but it's not very, very common. So let me jump into the type of analysis that we actually do, and the one that can be converted into programs that can analyze images. And this is what I call structural forensic analysis. Let me tell you a few examples of what we are doing. and you will understand how this can be used for several applications. One of them is camera identification. You should know that practically all sensors embedded in your cameras, be them CMOS, CCD, etc., they have an intrinsic noise pattern. This noise pattern is called PRNU for photo response non-uniformity. And it's like a sort of fingerprint that is present in every image that your camera takes. So your camera takes a picture. This picture has a noise-like pattern, which looks like noise. It's invisible because it's very, very faint. And it has some properties. It's robust, stable, and universal. So it's in every camera, mostly in every camera. It doesn't age, so it's based. It has to do with the electronics of the camera, and it's robust because it's relatively invariant to changes in the settings of the camera. So how can you use this for camera identification? Well, basically, if you have a suspect camera and you have a test image, what you have to do is basically extract this PRNU from a number of images taken by the camera. So with one image of the camera, you cannot do this because it's not enough. Let's say the pattern is not visible enough, is not clear enough to be able to use it. You need a few images taken by the camera. The more images you use, the better this extraction will be. You extract this thing called the PRNU from a set of images, and then you just ask yourself, is this test image contain this PRNU? And you do a matching between the test image and the PRNU, and then you answer yes or no, this image comes from this suspect camera. So you have to have a number of images known to be taken by the camera, and then you can answer these kind of questions. The PRNU extraction is similar to what people do in photo astronomy. The more images, well, there you want to detect stars, right? So the more, well, the one on the right, probably maybe you don't see this in this slide here, but the one on the right is cleaner, has less blurriness, and this is because you are stacking a number of exposures of the sky, the night sky. And this basically is what we do to extract the PRNU. We average, so we extract the PRNU, but we average it along several images, and then the more images we use, the better quality the PRNU will have. Then you can use that to cluster images. For instance, you say you are the police and you have a number of images in a hard drive that you have acquired, and you want to know which images come from which cameras or which images come from the same camera. You can do that by using the PRNUs. So we have developed a software which is called Matchinger, which does this. Let me show you one example of. Probably will not have time to show all of that, but let me show you how it works. So you start by selecting the images that you want to analyze, and then the first thing that you do is you extract the fingerprint. So these images that you are seeing here all come from the same camera. So we're extracting the PRNU from this camera. You see here in the bottom, let me stop here. You see here in the bottom a bar that is showing the quality of the PRNU. The more images you have, the better the quality. So here we are in the orange part, meaning that we are not having enough images to really be trustworthy in what we say. But yet, it can be used for checking whether an image comes or not from that camera. So here we're downloading images and we're just passing the test. And as you see, the ones that showing green are okay. These are okay. This one is in orange. Let me stop there. So, oops. So this one is in orange. And that means that it's not absolutely sure that this image comes from the same camera. It does, but it's not absolutely sure because, again, the PRNU we extracted is not good enough. If we had more images, it would be better. One thing that we can do is we can use the images that we already detect, like in this case, these two, we can use them to improve the estimate, and maybe if we rerun the experiment, we can get a better score. Of course, if you use images that don't come from that camera, like these ones, then well, it will show in red there, saying this doesn't come from this camera, right? You see the red scores there. Also, these don't come from the same camera. So here on the top, you will see a red mark. Also here, no match. So basically, this is the purpose of this tool. I have another. Let me just stop here. I have another example here with clustering, but I don't think we have the time to show it. So I'm going to stop here with this telling you about Matchinger. And I will skip this and go into the forgery detection and localization, which is probably the most interesting thing, given what I said in the beginning of the talk. So in forgery detection, what do? We look for a property that images have, and then let's say we want to put this this policeman in the image on the right. Well, we analyze the property in the image, let's say in one part of the image, and then we look for the values of the property across the whole of the image. And if we see that if the property has a different value, then we say, okay, this part of the image doesn't correspond to what it should be. So from there, we can actually decide whether the image has been, or a part of the image has been tampered. So let me show you this with the peer renew. Remember, the peer renew is this fingerprint that comes from an image. Let's say we are able to compute the peer renew because we have some images taken by the same camera. In the center, you see a doctor image, which comes from the one on the left, and the water comes from the one on the right. If we are able to extract the peer renew from the one on the left, then we will do a block-based analysis from the one on the right, and then we will see that the peer renew that we find on the part that is in red doesn't correspond to what it should be, right? So we can use this property. In this case, the property is the peer renew to detect whether an image has been tampered with or not, and where the forgery has been taking place. You can also use other properties like the chromatic aberration. The chromatic aberration is basically the property that light rays don't refract the same, but they do depending on the wavelength. So you expect to have more aberration near the borders of the image, and you see that the lights don't, the blue, green, and red don't correspond to each other if you move away from the focal center. So, well, this is somewhat hard to spot, but it can be systematized. Here, probably you will not see. Well, maybe you can see this in this one on the right. You see what we call it, the chromatic aberration. You see like blue and red don't correspond to each other. Also green here, and this is chromatic aberration, and you can detect this automatically. Again, this happens mostly on the borders of the image. You don't see this so much in the center. Another one is the color filter array, because cameras, most commercial cameras, use the so-called color filter array. The color filter array basically appears because sensors only measure amounts of light, right? They convert light to electrons, to electric currents. So in order to get red, green, or blue elements in your image, well, you have to put filters. So every element is actually measuring a red or a green or a blue. And then there is an interpolation that produces all the red, green, blue elements that are familiar to us. So if you actually were looking at a picture, well, the actual elements that produce the image are the ones illustrated here, but the others are interpolated. Different cameras may have different patterns. So if you detect this pattern, then you can actually tell one model apart from others. This is the most common one, the so-called Bayer pattern. As you see, there are more greens than reds and blues, and this is because our eye is more sensitive to green light. But there are others like diagonal Bayer, diagonal stripes, pseudo-random Bayer, and so on. So you can actually tell which one has been used depending on what you see there. Well, then the interpolation algorithm also is different from different cameras because often they use proprietary algorithms to do the interpolation. The interpolation basically goes from these values that you get from this mosaic, it's called the mosaic, and they interpolate the values in between. So for instance, you see there the green channel, and in the green channel, you interpolate values that are circled in red here. Because you don't have them, you have to generate them by interpolation. So every camera has a different, well, not every camera, but every manufacturer has different proprietary algorithms, and this can be detected. So for instance, well, another thing that you can do is to measure resampling traces. Well, in this image, you probably see something that is a bit odd there. Well, it turns out this is the cat that was coming from a different image. And this says something that you can detect by using the resampling traces. Resampling traces basically occur when you try to resize objects. And when you're trying to doctor an image by copying and pasting something on it, then typically there is this interpolation going on, because you have to resize things so that the size is commensurate with the other objects in the scene. So there is an interpolation there. And again, this interpolation can be detected. So for instance, in this case, you see one example here. And if you look carefully, you will see these traces of the interpolation. So these traces of interpolation, since they are more or less systematic, they can be detected automatically. So with this, we can produce these very cool maps that are called heat maps, and that basically tell you what's the probability, the estimated probability that a part of the image, say a block of the image, has been manipulated. By combining this with some thresholding, you can, as you can see in the bottom, you can extract a binary mask telling what you believe that has been modified in that image. Let me explain a little bit about the one that is the most successful method for detecting manipulations, which is the double compression detection. Well, most images that are taken by conventional cameras are compressed into a standard called JPEG. So you have probably seen your images with a JPG extension. This is the so-called JPEG standard. And the JPEG standard happens to rely on a transform called a DCT, in which basically the image, the blocks of 8x8 pixels are transformed using this transform. And then the result is quantized. The more this result is quantized, the less room you need to store the image, because there is a heavier quantization, but the quality of the result is less. So basically, what we do is we look at this quantization, because when you quantize values, basically what you're doing is representing objects with a few possible values out of many. And this is a very, very interesting trace from the forensic point of view. So, well, let me just skip this one. For instance, the one on the top would be one of these coefficients, let's say one of the histogram of one of these coefficients. Basically, you throw in a number of coefficients for this DCT. And then you see on the top what is a natural image, and on the bottom you see what happens when you do quantization. And this is when you compress an image, you will see things happening like in the bottom. So there are these clear steps, and you see that not every value is possible after this quantization. So this is a trace that is very, very useful. Not enough, as I will explain. So suppose that I want to make a picture out of these two that you see on the top. And well, if I look at the DCT coefficients, I will see something like what you see in these two pictures on the right. So as you can see, the histogram of these values, again, because of the compression, cannot take any possible value, but only a few, right? So for instance, on the top one, you see that it can take values 7, 14, 21, plus some rounding errors that you see here. Right? But most of the values taken can be at 7, 14, 21, and so on. For the other one, because it's compressed less heavily, you see the values at 5, 10, 15, and so on. So what happens when you combine these two images? Well, when you combine these two images, let me see if I can get it. Okay. Typically, the 8x8 blocks that you create are misaligned. And this is very, very useful for us because since they are misaligned, you can check whether there are traces of the first compression on the altered image. So the altered image is compressed, this one is compressed with the same quality factor as the original. But when you place this onto this one, then this part was compressed with a quality factor of 70, and then you can tell that this has happened because you see the histogram in this case, and you see that, well, you should expect values at 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on, but some of them are kind of empty. And this is something that for us is very useful because we can use this to detect whether there has been a manipulation. So let me show you the software that we have developed. Well, a demo of the software. This software, I have to say that has been very successful. We are commercializing it through licensing. I cannot reveal which companies are using it, but I can tell that more than 1 million images per day are processed with our software, which is a real success. And let me show you how it works with this demo. So, well, the software is called Forensian, and here we have some examples. Let me just try to stop. So here's one image. In this image, there has been something, well, you can guess that it's a tennis ball, but it has been removed. So by doing this analysis of the different DCT coefficients that I was telling you about, plus some other things, well, we can process it. And then you see that is revealing that there was something there. So the software is not able to tell there was a tennis ball there. What was that? It's stupid in that sense. It doesn't go to the semantics of the scene. It just goes and analyzes the different blocks of the image, and then it gives a probability to each block that it has been tampered, right? So you see, this is why you see these heat maps in the pictures. There are other examples here. For instance, this one. Well, let's see, this one. And again, you will see that there is some object there. These objects, normally when you have a background and then you just copy paste parts of the background, it's very, very difficult to spot by the human eye. But, well, this has nothing to do with the human eye. It has to do with statistical properties that if they are not there, our software will detect, right? So for us, sometimes it's much harder to detect things with our software that are you know, look really odd, but for us, they're not easy to detect. On the other hand, things that are very, very difficult to detect for the human eye, well, are detectable using these softwares. So here is an example. So the one here is correct when it's processing it. And the software tells you in green the ones that it thinks that are correct, nothing shown here. This one thinks that this has been manipulated, and then it shows to the operators what is the part that we think has been manipulated, right? In this case, it was the face, of course. So let me jump to the next one. I think it's more what the real life is. And this is a Spanish ID manipulation. This can be done with well, this is let's say a good one. And the demo is about using GIMP to alter, and you will see how easy it is to, this is almost real time. So, you know, you can change numbers very, very easily with, this is using GIMP as the photo editing. You can change very, very easily things. So you can think that this is a very, very common process that people do when they want to fake identities. If you want to register, well, you will change the photographs, or you will change some of the data that appear there, so that you create a new identity when you are registering for a new, let's say, insurance online. So the software, so I guess this is saved now. Yeah, so this is saving the result. So the software, again, it looks, when we process this with Forensian, then it looks for these traces, and then you will see what's the result. Right, you see, so this is showing exactly what are the parts that have been manipulated. And then, well, here in the top shows you what's the confidence. It shows even the cameras with which this image could have been taken, and so on. So it creates a bunch of interesting information. But the most interesting thing for these companies is that it shows the areas that have been manipulated. And I think that I ran out of time. It's a pity because I had other things to show you, but I think I should leave some time for questions. So thanks for listening to me, and I will stop sharing the screen, I think, or yeah, because no, okay, I guess I can see the questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Professor Fernando. Actually, it is very, very interesting talk. I have many questions, but I will leave the questions to others because we just have 7 minutes for questions. Yeah. So if there are any questions you'd like to ask to Dr. Fernando? Okay. So actually, I have a couple of questions. Let me first ask.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the first one. So what about the other image processing approaches? If we have an image and did a couple of image processing like filtering or averaging or a histogram equalization on the image, after doing that, is it possible to discover or detect the forensic images after doing a couple of process on it? Yes. Or the real image? Yeah.
Yes. So let's say for each of these manipulations, you can, most of them leave traces, right? For instance, histogram equalization is one that has been studied quite enough, and and it leaves some traces that can be detected. Of course, the more, let's say, the more operations you combine, the more difficult it is to detect the ones on the beginning of the pipeline. So think of this as a pipeline. The closer you are to the end, the more easy it is to detect them. But the ones at the beginning become relatively difficult because they have been, let's say, overwritten. The traces have been overwritten by other operations. So it is possible to establish what was the pipeline of processing, but up to some point. So the state of the art is that these days is not really possible to establish the whole processing pipeline, but just, let's say, the steps that take place at the end of the pipeline, because those are the ones that leave traces. So for instance, in this compression traces that I was talking about, if you do lots of post-processing to that, then these traces will disappear eventually.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, right? Because every operation creates its own traces. Yeah.
But to extract the PRNU from such an image, a smoothed image, we have it's a raw image and we have an average image from it. I think it will be difficult to extract the PRNU from the smoothed one. Am I right or not?
You are right. So again, for instance, in the case of the PRNU, think of the PRNU as something that is extremely faint, is a very, very weak signal. So if you start doing, so it has two things. The PRNU is a very, very weak. So when you start doing, for instance, compression, or when you start doing filtering, then the PRNU is quite damaged. It survives very, very weakly. But the other, let's say the good news is that cameras these days have millions and millions of pixels, right? So that's an advantage, because when you are doing these tests of attribution, then in those cases, you have many, many, many pixels to use. So some of them are damaged, most of them are damaged, but some of them survive, so to speak. So it is possible to recover them quite nicely. Let me tell you the example, and this is a real life example of images being sent, for instance, through WhatsApp. So WhatsApp does resizing of the images and compression. So even if the image is already compressed, they do recompression of the image, and they do resizing. So there's an interpolation going on, and so on. All these operations damage the PRNU quite severely, but still you can recover the images from, actually the ones that I was showing you in this demo were sent through WhatsApp, because this is a showcase that, I mean, a case that people are looking into, because, you know, these kind of images are exchanged by WhatsApp or Facebook or Twitter. Yes. So yeah, in essence, it survives, but of course, the more operations you do, the less clearly you can see it.
Yes, I got it. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Fernando. Is there anybody who would like to ask Professor Fernando? Okay. Thank you. I think we run out of time now. Yeah. So thank you for this interesting talk. And next time, I would like to see you here in Egypt.
Hopefully,
yes,
I will. Yes. I wish I were there now.
Yeah, we do.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fernando.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.